Hola, camaradas. Bienvenidos a la show del Midwestern Marx. Very happy to have you all here. Welcome. Just little old me here. So far, roadside revolutionary, but we'll get you some friends in here soon. We've got some interesting videos to cover today. I just came across this video of somebody telling Jordan Peterson that Africa is not poor because of colonization, which we'll see how they try and go about making that argument, but it's not true. So we'll combat that. I haven't seen the video itself yet, but it'll be interesting to deconstruct here on stream. I've also got some other things planned for you all today. It should be a full, fantastic show. We're going to be talking about Laos. I've been reading a lot about Laos. Laos is one of the 5 remaining existing Marxist-Leninist socialist countries on Earth. So I realized a few weeks ago that I didn't know enough about Laos as I was having a conversation with a cousin of mine who's spent a lot of time there. So I figured that would be a good thing to discuss since I've been reading about it and since it seems like it's criminally understudied. Lots to learn from our Laotian comrades. So yeah. What's up, comrade? Back on the old streaming software? Yeah, just for now. I didn't feel like messing with Streamlabs today, but I'm sure we'll go back to Streamlabs soon as I get to know the software better. But love the haircut. Thank you. Lobster Man is an idiot. He is. What's up, Bjork the pessimist? Long time no see. All right. Africa is quite rich. It's just been pillaged and enslaved. Absolutely. We'll dive into all this good stuff. Start deconstructing Jordan Peterson from the ground up right after our intro. I'm gone. I'm back. Sorry, y'all. I know you're not supposed to leave the overhead lights on, but there's no way when you stream. But there's no way to keep my fan on without keeping the lights on right now. So until I get an AC unit in my room and I can stop profusely sweating, I'm going to have to keep the overhead lights on along with the fan, although it's off right now. So, all right, now you know a lot about my room. We can get into the stream. Looks like we got tons of people filling in already. What's up? All the chills when they start to play the international. Love the edit also. Thank you. I agree. Same here. Has JP come out as an expert on yet another subject? Yes. Jordan Peterson, of course, is a master of all subjects. He hasn't read on all subjects or learned from experts on all subjects, but he himself has declared himself to be an expert on everything, including colonization. So that's what we're going to be deconstructing today. Obviously, my I would say area of expertise is more so Latin America than Africa. But I still think I know enough about colonization and the development of capitalism to be able to deconstruct this goofy argument. So, yeah, not feeling like going to welding tonight with that heat. Ooh, that's going to be tough. That is going to be tough. It ain't easy being a welder. All right, so this video is from 10 months ago. Obviously, you all know that colonization was a huge part of what allowed the Western European countries and the US to industrialize and develop capitalism first. And it's a major factor in why Africa is less developed, why Latin America is less developed. These countries were colonized for years. Then after World War II, there were all these independence movements, and all these countries supposedly gained sovereignty and gained independence. But through various methods that we call neocolonialism, Europe and the US have maintained control over the economies of many African and Latin American countries and continue to keep them in an underdeveloped state. Now, of course, this is something that China is trying to combat with the Belt and Road Initiative, offering all these developmental loans to African, Latin American, Middle Eastern, South Asian countries that are aimed at financing equity in these countries. Equity meaning money that makes money, investments that make money. So not debt trapping these countries like the US, the IMF, and the World Bank have done, the global Western dominated financial system, but rather giving these countries reasonable loans that they can pay back that are aimed at developing infrastructure, aimed at developing things that can help these countries be more prosperous in the future, raise their people out of poverty and such. And the interest rates for most of these Belt and Road Initiative loans are set around 4%. So if you know anything about US and European history, you know that the US did a similar thing for Europe after World War II. A lot of the industry had been destroyed by bombing and fighting. So the US offered Europe their allies in West Europe, a bunch of investment loans at about 4% interest, basically the same thing China's doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. But the US, of course, wanted a buffer against the Soviet Union and the spread of communism, which is why they looked to build up their allies in West Europe. So yeah, we will get into this though without further ado. Feel free to send any super chats, and I will answer any super chat questions or respond to any comments as soon as we're done with this segment.
Well, you list here in one of your articles where you make reference to these rating systems, the bottom 10 countries for doing business in the world: Chad, Haiti, Central African Republic, Congo Democratic Republic, South Sudan, Libya, Yemen, Venezuela. There's a lovely example: Eritrea and Somalia. And so there are 3 exceptions.
Somalia? Why does he say everything so weird? And he has to hit on Venezuela too. Oh yeah, there's a great example of socialism. Venezuela, no iPhone. Like the guy literally speaks in memes at this point while calling himself an academic.
In the African ecosystem, Mauritius, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Botswana, and Zambia, you pointed out in your prospectus, is it prospectus article?
Prospectus article of
Right.
Institute.
Right, that Mauritius is a rising star, and Rwanda is in some ways comparable to Georgia. So some of these countries have started to get this right.
Yes.
And so what's the consequence of that? And what does right mean?
What they have understood, what these countries have understood, is that economic freedom is at the center for prosperity building. Rwanda, for example, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is explicit about it. He said he wants to be the Lee Kuan Yew he wants to be the Singapore of Africa, and Lee Kuan Yew is his model. Now, the dirty mouths are going to start shouting, oh, yeah, see.
So when they say freedom, when they say economic freedom is the key to prosperity, they mean free markets. They mean austerity, meaning no minimum wage, no unions, no social welfare programs, no nationalized industry that are made to invest in the country. Just free markets, which for Western multinationals, for companies and banks that are based in the West, means freedom of exploitation, means very, very cheap labor and free access to African resources. Now, multinationals can get very prosperous when they are able to pillage foreign countries without having to invest any of the surplus back into those countries, just taking it as profit. So that's often what these people point to and say, look, they're succeeding economically. Look how well these multinational corporations are doing. But success for a multinational corporation doesn't necessarily mean a successful or more free economy for the working masses, of course. And in fact, a lot of the times what they mean by economic freedom is the opposite for the working masses of these countries. The more economic freedom means the more multinationals are able to pillage these countries and the less the resources are invested into the people, and the less protections there are for laborers in these countries. So it's just a rhetorical trick. And this stems from the Koch brothers think tank called the Heritage Foundation, which created an economic freedom index where they rate countries based on how economically free they are. And if you break it down, it's literally just how much austerity they have, how much trickle-down economics they have. Freedom equals freedom of exploitation for multinationals.
Dirty mouths are going to start.
And that's the paradigm that they see the world through. And then, when other people don't buy into that nonsense, they go, oh, you just haven't studied economics. But in reality, the economics that they're using is just a fraud pseudoscience.
Now, the dirty mouths are going to start shouting, oh, yeah, see, authoritarian, blah, 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 whatever. Me, I want to talk only about on the economic side. If you take Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore as your example.
Hey, we can agree on that. I promise not to call you an authoritarian, random lady.
Then it means that, like him, you're going to have to be serious about economic freedom. And that's exactly what he did. That's what Singapore did. When Singapore figured that out, they went on to put in the right reforms to make their environment some of the most business-friendly environments in the world, one of the most free markets environment in the world. And you saw the magic of Singapore. Today, Singapore is richer than its ex-colonizer, Great Britain. So when I hear people telling me today, oh, Africa is poor because of colonization, I'm like, please, let's move on from that. Does it have maybe a tiny percentage in where we are today? Maybe, and I don't know. But I know.
What do you mean you don't know? It wasn't even that long ago, lady. Of course it had something to do with Africa's poverty today. Of course colonization had something to do with it. And she says, I don't know. Like, you're admitting that you haven't studied it then. You're admitting that you haven't studied the effect that colonialism and neocolonialism had on the African economy. Like, why do you think the UK, France, Belgium, and all these European countries spent so much money and effort colonizing Africa and hanging on to these colonies and suppressing rebellions at every turn? It wasn't just for fun. It was for economic purposes. Economics were the driver of colonialism, the thirst for surplus and for profit, for exploitation. And we'll get more in depth on that later. Why make a statement if she doesn't know? Exactly. Right. She's admitting here that she hasn't studied colonization and then says, it's part of it because Singapore. Her example of Singapore is wrong. Yeah, I'm not a Singaporean expert, but I'm sure it is. So feel free to explain.
No, it's not the cost. Because if it were, many countless countries have been colonized before. And by the way, colonizing one another is humanity's history. It just happened that maybe Africa has been one of the last, colonized region in the world. So in our psyche, it is there and it acts like nothing happened before to others. But flash news, it's the history of the world. We've been capturing each other back and forth.
Okay. Colonization is the history of the world, and Africa is one of the places most recently colonized. Right, that doesn't imply that Africa's current state of being more impoverished than a lot of Western countries doesn't result from colonialism. Right, just because colonialism happened before in the past doesn't mean it's not happening now, and it doesn't mean it doesn't have economic effects. Right, she's saying it's clear in the psyche or whatever, but it's obvious for everybody to see. Right, it's obvious for everyone to see that Africa is incredibly rich when it comes to resources. Incredibly rich, richer than most Western countries. Yet when it comes to industrialization, development, bringing people out of poverty, combating things like hunger, they rank very low. Right? That is absolutely because of colonization. And like, why do you think, if it wasn't for colonization, why do you think Western countries took off so fast? Why do you think the European countries were able to develop and build all this industry, while equally wealthy African countries in terms of resources were not able to? Right? Well, why were they held in poverty while they were being held as British colonies? It's because their resources and labor, or the products of labor, were being extracted. They're being taken back to Europe to enrich private capitalists, individual capitalists, or corporations. rather than investing that surplus in economic development in the home country. Like, this is very, very, very basic colonial economics that this lady is just completely overlooking to give us some idealist phrases about freedom and about business interests.
All of that. So anyway, but the truth is, Singapore, richer than Great Britain today. And then Hong Kong happened. And then because Hong Kong happened, China even today happened. Because China's like,
bruh. No. Oh my God. China happened because Hong Kong. Hong Kong allowed for business freedom, so China decided to embark on a path of socialist economic planning and poverty alleviation. I love when they do this. I love when they say everything good that happened in China was because of the markets and the market reforms. Everything bad in China is because of socialism. And just completely ignore, the economic reality of what's happened in China. Ignore the fact that they have party cadres, Communist Party cadres, who are in charge of every single area in China. And they report back to the Central Committee, who creates an economic plan for the whole country. This is not capitalism, right? This is not something that this lady would consider business freedom or whatever. And they devise an economic plan based on the needs of the people. And then those cadres are in charge of making sure that every area has their needs met. So early on in the revolution, this was making sure that every area had food and water and that they were meeting the quotas for industrialization and development. But nowadays, it's making sure that people have Wi-Fi, making sure that people have clean and sustainable housing, right? Ensuring that each of these areas is able to thrive and meet their people's needs, which is why China's the only country on earth that has abolished relative poverty, right? This is why in New York, in the US, even in this massively wealthy city where Wall Street is located, so billions and billions and billions of dollars in wealth, you still have thousands of people sleeping on the streets. You still have subways that are dirty and that are breaking down, right? Because capitalism will never abolish poverty. Everywhere where that wealth accumulates under capitalism, poverty accumulates as well. China has combated this with socialism. Right. So to say that they got rich because of Hong Kong and because of capitalism is silly. Right. They allowed for some capitalist markets so that they could develop themselves using the wealth that was already in the West. But that wealth was heavily controlled. They were only allowed, or multinationals were only allowed to invest in specific financial zones that were determined by the party. So this was all due to central planning. And let's get into some of the stuff that I have about Africa here. Like I said, if the colonial powers, if colonization is not the reason Africa is more poor than the West, why do you think they colonized Africa for so long? Why do you think the U.S. maintains an entire system of drone warfare and hundreds of military bases in Africa through AFRICOM, Africa Command? Why do you think they do that? You think it's really to combat terrorism, even though we know that in many cases, 90% of the intended targets being killed by U.S. drone strikes were civilians? No, of course not. It's to enforce U.S. economic interests because corporations control our government and they have an economic interest in exploiting these countries. So if you want the quintessential sort of book for Westerners to understand how Africa was underdeveloped and originally colonized, check out How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. This is very, very good. Excellent book that a lot of people have recommended. But we also have specific examples even after the era of colonialism, right? After these countries supposedly gained their independence, we have cases like Libya, where their leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was overthrown by Hillary Clinton, Obama, and NATO, which took Libya from one of the most prosperous, one of the richest nations in all of Africa, which they didn't do, by the way, by giving freedom to businesses, by promoting business freedom. They did it through socialism explicitly. That's what Gaddafi said in his Green Book. And they did it through central economic planning and making sure that their people's needs were met. It wasn't Marxism-Leninism, but it was a Libyan form of socialism, right? So they became one of the most prosperous countries in all of Africa, but were turned into a country with no central government, an open-air slave market, extreme poverty, and constant civil war. But guess what? Western multinationals have access to all of Libya's resources. Their resources. So a blatant example within the last decade of colonization destroying a country and taking them from being very rich to very poor. But please, lady and Jordan Peterson, tell me more about how colonization isn't what made Africa poor. Explain Libya then, you absolute corporate shills. If colonization didn't make Africa poor, please explain to me what happened in Libya. Why did they get so poor after their government was toppled by the Clintons and Obama? Also, Gaddafi had plans to create a Central African Bank, which would be aimed at industrial development and poverty alleviation, making Africa rich, combating the years of colonialism that have kept Africa in poverty. So guess what they did? They killed him, because colonialism is the reason there's poverty in Africa. Also, an estimated 100 to 200 million dollars in Libyan reserves were stolen by Western corporations and have never been given back. But that's not why they're poor. It's because Gaddafi wasn't friendly enough to Western banks. Like, pull your head out of your ass or stop lying for money, Jordan Peterson and this random lady. Or what about the Lion of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba? Another hero of Africa with all sorts of plans for economic development, all sorts of plans for developing the industry of his country. He was overthrown in a coup that was backed by the US and Belgium and replaced by Mobutu Sese Seko, whom the word kleptocracy was named after. Kleptocracy means a corrupt autocratic dictatorship where the leadership of a country uses that country's resources to enrich themselves and Western multinationals who are backing them. Right? So they overthrew this guy who wanted to develop the Congo, who wanted to invest in the people, and replaced them with a kleptocracy, with an autocratic dictator who took all the money and lived on a mansion and handed the rest off to Western multinationals. You don't think that that kept the Congo poor? Well, then you're an idiot. I don't know what else to tell you, because it absolutely did. It ruined Lumumba's plans for economic development in the Congo and all of Africa, because he was a Pan-Africanist, by the way. And you killed him and replaced him with a guy who hoarded all the resources for himself. That made them poor. That made them poor. It was being too friendly to Western business interests. Moving on. Amit Sankara. Again, this is all these people were killed after their countries gained independence. Or, these were oftentimes the leaders who led their countries in independence struggles in the case of Sankara and Lumumba. But then, the US was fine. Okay, fine. You can have your independence. You can have your sovereignty. You can have your own flag. But you can't take control of your economy. Right? And when these people tried to develop, when they tried to invest in industry and bringing people out of poverty and raising their economy, their economic standing, that's when they were killed in coups. Because it is colonialism that keeps countries in Africa poor. Duh. So Sankara planted trees, combated corruption, gave equal rights to women, launched vaccination campaigns, and most importantly, invested in development. Invested in development and industry, which is why the French and the US killed him in a coup, cut him up into little pieces and buried them in scattered places, and then had this autocratic dictator named Blaise Compaoré rule the country for the next 20 years, where Western multinationals would pillage their resources. But that's not why they're poor, right? I'm sure it has nothing to do with it. And as we mentioned, there's, of course, AFRICOM, where the U.S. maintains this giant expense. Oh, I thought there was a map of the AFRICOM bases on here, but The US maintains this giant, expensive system of drone surveillance and drone warfare over Africa in order to control their resources and make sure they remain in the hands of Western multinationals. This is also why Joe Biden has been bombing Somalia and why he just launched troops into Somalia. It wasn't just for fun. It wasn't just because Joe Biden doesn't really like Somalia. It was for resources, to take their resources back to the West. Colonialism, which is why Africa doesn't have as many resources or doesn't have as much industry, and the West does. It's because we took it. We took it from them. That's what colonialism was. Yes, that's why they're poor, or poorer than us. Although they're making great strides to develop themselves thanks to the Belt and Road Initiative and other reasons. And like I said, this is just neo-colonialism. This is just colonialism and controlling the economies of countries who are supposedly sovereign and independent. But you had overt colonialism all the way up until, after World War II was when all these independence struggles started. So you had overt colonialism where African countries were ruled over by European countries. And you don't think the European countries were stealing the resources? And you don't think that has anything to do with why European countries got super rich and why African countries were held in poverty despite equal amounts of resources? Like, how stupid can you be? How stupid can you actually be? You don't think the Belgian King Leopold cutting off the hands of Congolese people who didn't work hard enough had anything to do with why Africa's poor? And guess what? Those people who are working for King Leopold in the Congo, they're not working to produce something that then is invested in them, invested in their own country. Belgium is taking those resources back to Europe. So the surplus that's produced in the colonized countries gets sucked out and brought over to the West. That is why they're poor. That is why King Leopold cut people's hands off if they didn't work hard enough. It wasn't because he really cared about the people of the Congo and he knew if people worked harder, their surplus would be invested in them. No, he was trying to steal more and more of their resources. The entirety of Kenya was controlled by Britain, which incited the Mau Mau rebellion that was brutally suppressed by the British. And the UK lied about their atrocities there for years. They also held the Cape Colony, which was basically just the southern cone of Africa, this giant portion of what's now South Africa that was completely controlled by the UK. So of course, all those that incredibly resource-rich area was having their resources and labor extracted by the British for years and years and years. Angola and Mozambique, very similar situations, two incredibly resource-rich countries that were held by Portugal for years. You, of course, have Algeria, which was colonized by France, and this has led to one of the greatest movies of all time, The Battle of Algiers, which apparently this lady on Jordan Peterson's show has never watched. So you don't think all of these events, which I'm just scratching the surface of all the colonization that happened, you don't think that's what kept Africa poor and helped Europe get rich? It absolutely is. In fact, economic exploitation was the basis for all of this colonialism. It was not just for fun, right? It was the basis of colonialism. Without the drive to super exploit Africa, without the drive to steal their resources, there would be no colonialism. That was the whole damn point. Like, honestly, what are these people on? What are you on? I know what you're on. You're on think tank money. You're on NGO money. You're being paid by billionaires to lie, say that colonization did not hurt Africa. And in fact, all they need to do is just hand over the continent to Western multinationals and all of a sudden they'll be rich. You scummy, scummy liars. Disgusting liars. Propagandists for the ruling, the murderous, torturing, imperialist ruling class of our current global capitalist system. And, that will be your legacy here on this earth. Will be lying to people, lying to the working masses on behalf of corporations who rob and steal and kill to get what they want.
Wait a minute, what went on over there? And then China went on to do the exact same thing with its SEZs, the special economic zone.
And it's just such idealism too. Singapore's rich. Singapore's rich. China's rich. Guess it wasn't colonialism. You haven't proved anything. You haven't proved anything. This would get a D if you were in 3rd grade. If this was an essay that you wrote for your 3rd grade elementary school class. Because you're not proving anything. You're just saying, look at Singapore. They have a lot of money. Look at China. They have a lot of money. It must be because they handed over their resources to Western multinationals, which no, they freaking didn't. So you're lying about that too. But you're not even saying anything. You're not even making a coherent argument.
Some of the most free market zones in the world. And then look at it happen in communist China, who, when it comes to economics, decided that we're going to do the free market, we're going to be capitalist, because that's the only way. We tried everything else. We killed hundreds of millions of people, and we have nothing to show for it.
Look at this fucking idiot, dude. Yeah, China's fully capitalist today. By this laugh proves that Jordan Peterson is a fraud.
Millions of people, and we have nothing to show.
Agree with anything that fits his ideology, but who doesn't study and engage with the things he's actually talking about. Because if the U.S. started implementing the policies that China has today, these guys would be freaking out. They would be like, "What about the free market? What about my free market?" Because what China does is they have Communist Party members sitting on the boards of all the major corporations. And all the major corporations have to fall in line, including the Western corporations invested in China. They have to fall in line with what the state central plan is. They have to fall in line with the plan that's been laid out for development in China. They don't have freedom to exploit the same way that they do in Western countries. Right? And if the U.S. started doing this, if a Communist Party was in power in the U.S., and controlling what all the business interests did, you would not call that free market capitalism. But you do it with China so you can lie and take credit for all the good things that China's done. Right? China, look at what they did to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the Communist Party. The leader of their country said that we are following the Marxist worldview. Right? And Marxism has brought us to this place where we've alleviated poverty. But you guys just claim it's capitalist because it's convenient to support China nowadays because they've brought everybody out of poverty. I can't do it with the lobster man anymore. It's so sick to me that we live in a society where people like Jordan Peterson are considered intellectual icons. For this absolute child of a man, this buffoon who spends all day on Twitter, is considered a public intellectual, a leading intellectual, and he knows nothing about the subject he is talking about here. Nothing other than ideological jibber jabber and State Department talking points. Nothing. I mean, if there used to be anything valuable in Jordan Peterson's work, it's completely gone ever since he left the university and turn to these libertarian and Republican think tanks for his money. I mean, what a disgusting, sick man. You've gone for the Bowie in Berlin 77 hairdo. I'm just jealous. That's all right, Ross. Maybe we can do a hair transplant at some point. I'd be willing. You've given Midwestern Marx so much. I'll give it to you. You can have my mullet. Appreciate the €5. Thanks, man. Is it Singapore also propped up by foreign laborers and was a model for what Qatar does? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on Singapore, but it's likely the case. I know Qatar has the kafala system where if you're born in Qatar, like if your parents are born in Qatar and you're Qatari, you get access to like social programs funded by all the oil money and taxes on the oil oligarchs. But if you are a migrant, you sign into this kafala system where you're basically almost like a slave, right? Where you just have to work, and the landlord who owns your property is a Qatari citizen. So the Qatari citizens have ended up being like the landlord class. Of course, Qatar, you have the huge oil oligarchs, and you have the Qatari citizens who get some of that oil wealth, and they're like the middle class or landlord class. And then under them, signed into these kafala contracts that doesn't allow them to leave and keeps them trapped as the tenant of a Qatari citizen, you have the migrant workers, the migrant laborers. There's a whole bunch of U.S. troops stationed in Qatar as well, guarding that oil. A bunch of my friends got deployed there, so thank you for the super chats, you two. Nice mullet, comrade. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really embracing my Midwestern roots here. Dunk on him, Eddie. Hell yeah. You bet. You bet, Jimmy. I can't stand these people anymore. I can't stand them, and I get frustrated because, like, I've passed up so many opportunities to sell out at this point, and it hasn't even been a consideration. It's never crossed my mind. Of course I'm not selling out. Of course not. I'd rather die. And then to watch these dudes like Jordan Peterson prance around with all their money and brag about all their money, and they genuinely think that their money comes, or that the money's coming in because they're such a powerful intellectual icon, when really they're nothing but a corporate sellout. It infuriates me. It does. And it makes me disgusted that these are the intellectuals propped up by our society, right? That we have a society that takes people like Jordan Peterson and upholds them, says this is a wise man, right? When he's just lying about stuff, and there's no intellectual rigor there. None. I mean, it's shameful. It's shameful. And when you read good books, when you read books from people who are academically rigorous, you see how much effort they have to go to make sure that they get all their facts straight and to make sure that they're, connecting the dots correctly, making their argument in a way that's based in material reality. And there's none of that with Peterson. None of it. He's just like, China's capitalist. Okay, dude. If you say so. This is what people don't get about the market reforms in China. It was really on the margins of the economy. Right. The basis of their economy is still socialist. The majority, these people, Jordan Peterson, this lady, are talking about freedom of business, and freedom of business being what leads to poverty alleviation, when the majority of China's major businesses and all their banks are owned by the freaking government. But yeah, capitalism saved them. Like, you're so stupid. You're literally the stupidest person I've ever heard in my life. That's not true, but when I hear Peterson talk, I'm like, wow. Because it's that rare combination of stupidity and arrogance, which is what he accuses other people of being. He's arrogant. He thinks he's the man. He thinks he's smart as crap. He thinks his room is clean. And the stuff he's saying is just gobbledygook. It's garbage. Have you seen Second Thought's new video? I feel like you would have a lot to say on the topic. I have not. Thank you so much for the $10 super chat, Duck Hash Browns. These super chats are essential to what we do at the project here. Couldn't do it without you. For real, could not. Let's see what he talked about. Grifters. Why is there so much right-wing media? Hey, this would be a good thing to watch. Actually, I wasn't planning on watching this today. I had another video planned. But let's watch this because, oh shoot, I wanted to play a Parenti video too, but actually, let's play this quick, just as a way to sum up what we were saying about Jordan Peterson and about colonization in Africa, and then we'll go to that Second Thought video because that relates to what we were saying too. Y'all should consider a Midwestern Monks book of the month where people can have the opportunity to discuss and read text together. That's a great idea. We're pretty busy right now with Carlos and Noah are both teaching a class, and I'm obviously doing my thing. But I think a book of the month would be pretty easy. And we're always reading, so it'd be pretty easy to just talk about what we're reading. So I will definitely bring that up to Carlos and Noah and see what they have to say. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat, Sebastian. You've been going crazy with the super chats lately. We appreciate you a bunch. So time for Michael Parenti to disprove Jordan Peterson's claim and that random lady's claim that colonization is not the reason Africa's poor.
Of capitalism that it must expand. A no-growth capitalism, as some of our more naive ecologists have argued for, is a contradiction in terms. The reason you invest is to accumulate. And your accumulation of capital has no purpose or meaning unless you can mix it with labor to yet increase your wealth further. And of course, you use large sums of it for personal consumption and for political power and for control of your culture and for that wonderful, good, happy life that you so like. Now, that nature of expansion really affects the nature of, it's an important imperative because it means capitalism also can never stay home. It goes abroad. If you ever saw the film Controlling Interest, there's a corporate president who says, those corporations that stayed regional in New England years ago and decided not to go national, we can't even remember their names. They died. We had to go national. And those of us who are now national know we have to go international. We have to invest abroad. So one of the laws of capitalist motion and development is this inexorable expansion. And that means expansion into an expropriation of the third world. A process that's been going on for about 400 years, perpetrated by the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the Belgians, the French, the English, and most recently, most successfully, most impressively, by the Americans. That is by the ruling classes of these countries, not by the ordinary people. The ordinary people simply paid the costs of empire. The ordinary people simply sent their sons off to die on the plains of India or in the jungles of the Congo or in Latin America, wherever else. But that expropriation of the third world that's been going on for 400 years brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out, to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
Boom. Parenti said so much more in 3 minutes than Jordan Peterson and that lady said in 11. Jordan Peterson, that lady, spent 11 minutes. Well, I didn't watch the whole thing, but 4 minutes making zero arguments that were coherent or correct. Parenti fit like 100 into a 3-minute video, all based in facts, all based in real historical events. Notice how he brings up all these different examples of colonialism, whereas the successes of capitalism for Peterson and that lady were China, a socialist nation, and Singapore. Amazing, isn't he? Parenti's the GOAT. He is. He is. This is an interesting question. If the American economy sees significant failure in the next decade or two, do you see China expanding its markets to further let private companies try to fill the gap, or the gov? I don't know if I understand. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what the failure in the U.S. looks like. Because if failure in the U.S. means all those multinationals collapse I imagine China will expand the socialist part of their economy. They won't need, because the thing with China is they're very poor, and the U.S. puts any socialist country under sanctions. So the U.S. had all these wealthy capitalists, all these wealthy multinationals who had gotten rich from exploiting the American working class and exploiting the working masses and resources abroad in continents like Africa and Latin America, Southern Asia as well. So what China wanted to do was access some of that wealth, almost siphon some of that wealth from the West, because they had accumulated so much, and it was very difficult. It's very difficult to build socialism in isolation. So by allowing Western multinationals to make money in China, China avoided being sanctioned and being isolated and blocked off from the rest of the world by the U.S., same way like Cuba and other countries had been. And they allowed the wealth of those multinationals to help make China rich, to build up China's industry, to bring all sorts of new businesses and new commerce to China. So if there was some kind of collapse in the U.S., I don't think there would be as much of a need in China for investment from Western multinationals, I guess. But interesting question. Someone made a comment about the British and India. The Brits referred to India as the jewel in the crown. Yeah, they did. Acknowledging India as a major source of imperial wealth. India was the largest colony, the biggest textbook example of colonialism, probably. And yeah, these arguments from Jordan Peterson, I'm sure Jordan Peterson thinks all of his thoughts are original, and he just came up with them himself because he's such a big brain. But he's just repeating the same kind of arguments that were made back in the day. Right, the British were always trying to say India is not poor because of colonization. They're poor because of their race, or they're poor because of overpopulation. Like there was this giant famine in India, and Robert Thomas Malthus was like, it's because their population's too high. And his proof was like, look, as their population grew, people starved. Like that doesn't really prove anything, Malthus. And Marx destroyed that in that argument in Capital Volume 1, and showed how it was capitalism and colonialism that led to the famines in India. But people have always been denying that colonialism leads to poverty in the target country. It's just like, you wouldn't think anybody would be stupid enough in modern day in 2023 to make that argument. Like we're talking about arguments that originated in the early 1800s by, British colonial administrators. And people who were pushing race science. But now their arguments are being repeated by this modern day intellectual who thinks his shit don't stink, in Jordan Peterson. I mean, how embarrassing would it be to be that guy? He knows too. Like when he got ratioed by David Harvey, that made my life. Jordan Peterson came at David Harvey randomly for being a Marxist, and David Harvey was like, maybe you should read Marx so you don't get embarrassed in another debate. Just ratioed him, and Peterson was tweeting the rest of the day all angry. Like he knows he's a fraud, and he viciously attacks anybody who points it out. But yeah, just what an embarrassment of a man. He's everything like I wouldn't want my children to be, except for cleaning their rooms. It's good to keep your room clean. The claim is that colonials develop the colonies, right? They export capital to the colonies, but then, like in Venezuela, British Dutch Shell and all these other, and Lenin explains this in detail in Imperialism, which I have a full reading guide for and breakdown for, by the way, and summary of in a playlist on our YouTube. But they export capital, like in Venezuela, oil drills, so that they can suck the oil out. But then that surplus is going to the West, so none of the surplus created by the oil gets invested in anything else. Right? So all you have is the oil drills. You don't have schools or, industrialized agriculture. So the rest of the economy lags behind whatever resource is being exploited. And that's why Venezuela is still dependent on oil to this day, even though idiots like Peterson like to blame it on socialism. It's because of colonization. these people's view of the world is just so backwards, and it obscures so many people from seeing the truth, or it obscures the truth for so many people. And these people exist because they're funded and propped up by the ruling class, right? They think they're successful because of their own merit. They're so arrogant and egotistical, people like Jordan Peterson, that they think they're geniuses, when really they're just simps for the ruling class, which is why the ruling class boosts them and makes them celebrities and makes them rich. So let's watch Second Thought break down that phenomenon for us.
It's a disease that killed Spaniards in the 20s. Nope, it's something else. Google defines influence as a long sentence you already basically know. But what you might not know is exactly how much effort some people go through to exert it, or how much money they spend. And telling you about...
Noah would have loved that dad joke from JT there. Fantastic dad joke. Mistaking influence with influenza. I love it. Hold on. Let's have a laugh for JT here. Influenza. This guy gets it. This is a real intellectual.
These two things is really all this video is about. Because we all know the wealthy in this country have a lot of influence over our politics and our culture, and also everything left after that. So it's not like a video about that would be exposing some well-kept secret or anything. But what this video can do is...
He's so good. Our politics, our culture, and other things. Epstein. Second Thought's production value is so freaking incredible. I'm so jealous of JT. He's such a skilled, he's so articulate and intelligent, but then like the editing and the production value on his videos is just, it's so awesome that he has embraced Marxism, Leninism, and that he exists.
To give you an idea of scale. We've all heard the so-and-so spent $10 billion this election stat and thought, that sucks. But hardly anyone has seen diagrams like this, or like this, or like this, about the networks of influence that those election stats don't capture. And that's a shame, because when you go past the big number and get into the details of how influence is actually carried out and where the money goes, there's a lot more to it than most people realize. This right here is a really, really good visual representation of the wealthiest areas of influence, and I made it myself, and I got very positive feedback on it. And today, we're going to go over it and fill stuff in using just two families, the Kochs and the Wilkses. We could do more, but you'll see why just two is more than enough in a sec. All we're going to do this video is list their different methods.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what he said. You could do way more, but like pretty much every right-wing pundit is going to be filmed by the Kochs or the Wilkses. If you read Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, who's a journalist, liberal journalist, who wrote a full expose on what she calls the Kochtopus, which is this network of think tank money and NGO money set up by the Koch brothers to help them influence media and academia. So they dump millions and millions of dollars and get millions of dollars from other capitalists who then, call it charitable donations. We're donating to a college. It's charity. But what it does is influence these colleges by saying, we'll give you this money if you teach right-wing Milton Friedman style economics in your university. And they use that money to fund shows like the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro.
Of influence, how much they're spending, and its effects. That's it. Because honestly, I don't need to do anything else to make my point. The facts speak for themselves once I speak to them. Let's start with the Wilkses. This part of the video overlaps a bit with what my buddy Ugopnik did a few months ago, so if you want a more detailed look, go check out his video right here. Anyway, the Wilkses are two brothers with some very far-right politics, who made their billions in the fracking industry. So far so good. These guys could have been happy just casually destroying the place I live, Earth, and you probably would have never heard their name. But they cleverly realized they could use that money from fracking to destroy the other place I live, my brain. Because if you've never heard of the Wilkses before now, you've certainly heard of the online media industries that they fund, PragerU and the Daily Wire. In 2013, the Wilkses dumped over $6.5 million into PragerU, and in 2015, they funded the creation of the Daily Wire with $4.7 million in seed money. Let me tell you right now, nobody making socialist content has ever gotten that kind of seed money to do something similar. But
Yet we constantly get called puppets of Putin, puppets of Xi Jinping. And these folks like Jordan Peterson consider themselves intellectually rigorous. They consider themselves intellectual giants. No, dog. No. You're saying what the Wilkes brothers and what the Koch brothers want you to say, so they're funding you and boosting you. That's why when you end up in a debate about Marxism, you sound like an idiot because you don't actually understand what you're talking about. Right? These guys have just given you a platform to spew nonsense. And the more nonsense you spew, the more money you get, which is why Jordan Peterson has just become a more and more basic, far right wing pundit, and has pretty much given up on talking about psychology, which he actually has an academic background in.
But we'll get back to that later. What matters right now is what PragerU and the Daily Wire do with all that money. If, like me, you haven't checked in a while, get ready. They push the LGBT grooming narrative and call for increased state violence against those in the queer community. They've said the gay community was, quote, a hell of a lot better off when they were oppressed by the heterosexual monogamists than when they're allied with trans activists, repeating the myth that the biggest threat to queer people is other queer people, not far-right pundits literally calling for them to be imprisoned and executed. They've claimed the 2020 election was fraudulent. No surprises there.
These people are so ridiculous, too. They point at corporations like Matt Walsh. They'll point at corporations co-opting wokeism and using it as a marketing tool. They'll be like, see, wokeism is the problem with society. Wokeism is the problem with our culture. Wokeism is the root of all evil. Like, no, wokeism is just a tool they're using, just like racism was a tool they use to market things to you and keep people divided. And it's really them just co-opting social justice movements and utilizing identity politics to try and sell you crap you don't need and maintain their hegemony. But the root of the issue is capitalism, you dummies. It's not wokeism. It's not the tool that capitalists use to co-opt social justice movements and sell you crap. Like, these people are so stupid. It's the material basis of society that causes the problems of society. Wokeism is just a product.
They have segments talking about how they wish oh so badly that they could say the N-word, and that shopping at Target makes you, quote, gay and a pervert. That one's new. And they're all for book bans and book burnings because the Bible supposedly says that's okay. That climate change is a hoax, or the science just isn't in yet, so don't do anything. Wonder if the fracking billionaires like that one. And they've recently also casually dropped that they believe women are, quote, disproportionately wrecking the West. And I'm going to stop here because, one, all these examples are from just 1 month, May 2023 or thereabouts, and two, you get the idea. These online media outlets funded and owned by the Wilkses are broadcasting some of the most untrue, hateful, and oftentimes outright fascist rhetoric. And I'm using that word correctly, you can fight me in the comments. And they're doing so to audiences that are not just massive, but can actually rival more established media. You've seen the obscene subscriber counts of channels like PragerU and Ben Shapiro, but that's only giving you a small idea of these institutions' reach. On Facebook, for example, the Daily Wire often finds a larger audience than the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC News, and CNN combined, according to this NPR article from 2021. Not only do these online media have a huge role in shaping the national dialogue by nurturing and then feeding moral panics up to larger institutions like Fox, who will then encourage far-right vigilantes into acts of stochastic terrorism, these online personalities' influence helps them shape actual real-life laws. Recently,
I'm glad JT is using his face now. Hashtag mullet, hashtag chairman JT, hashtag Midwestern Marks. Me too. JT's a handsome man. It's not easy to get on camera, or to get comfortable talking to a camera, but I'm glad he has as well. Thank you so much, Sam Dixon. Appreciate the $5 super chat. Hope you like the mullet, and I hope we had a good time at Noah's Basics of Marxism class yesterday. I wasn't able to make it to that one, sadly, but actually I was there for a little bit on the YouTube stream of it.
For example, the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh was a big part of the reason that Bill HB1 passed in Florida, a bill banning gender-affirming healthcare for those under 18.
And that's the other thing that makes me so mad about Jordan Peterson, why I always throw ad hominem attacks at him after I dismantle his arguments, is because these guys do have an effect, right? There are a lot of young kids who might otherwise embrace socialism, embrace Marxism, and try getting to the truth if they weren't being brainwashed by Jordan Peterson, if they didn't think Jordan Peterson was this intellectual titan that he's not. And if Jordan Peterson wasn't being propped up by all these think tanks and NGOs to spread this nonsense. So he's brainwashing people, right? It's having an effect. It's making it harder to do my job, to explain the truth to people. It's obscuring the truth from them, which is why we do these response videos and these deconstruction videos.
So, money well spent for the Wilkses. But not just by the Wilkses. Although the Kochs aren't direct investors in either PragerU or the Daily Wire based on what we could find online, one of the Koch's nonprofits, American for Prosperity, and don't worry, we'll get back to them later, have campaigned on behalf of Ron DeSantis, and he gave over $100,000 to the Daily Wire last year. But that's obviously not all. Prominent Daily Wire figures like Ben Shapiro have received speaking fees from the Koch-funded Young America's Foundation and also Koch-funded Turning Point USA. You can already kind of see the network of mutual support appearing here, but we're not done yet. What about more traditional media, like the press? Well, these conservative infinite money glitches are there too. For example, Charles Koch has funded Tucker Carlson's media company, The Daily Caller. You might not have heard about The Caller before, but in 2017, it got $980,000 from a combination of funds from the creatively named Charles Koch Institute and the Charles Koch Foundation. And before you get worried, let me reassure you.
$980,000. Like, I just think about what Midwestern Marx has been able to do with, about $1,000 a month from Patreon, and investing that and expanding and getting like this new microphone, this computer, and how, that's helped our production value skyrocket and get way better. What would we be able to do with $980,000? Oh my gosh. It would be insane what we'd be able to do. It'd be insane how, I could hire an editor for every single video. It would shoot our production value through the roof, which as of now, we have someone helping me edit the videos just because people actually believe in what we're doing, which is the infinite advantage that we will always have over people like Jordan Peterson. Is, at the end of the day, the truth is on our side. And there are people who are actually dedicated to getting the word out there and getting the truth out there, versus he's a fraud who's being paid by capitalists to lie. So we have the truth on our side always, but what we would be able to do with that much money. We need an Ingalls. We do. Listen, we need an Ingalls, but I will forever be grateful for the $5 super chats, the $2 super chats from our audience. The super chats from you guys, or the $10 super chat we got from Duck Hash Browns, that means more to me than all the corporate money in the world. Stack up all the corporate money right over there in my room and say, you can have this if you sell out. And I'll go take $2 from Sebastian G over all this corporate money. I'm not a fraud like Jordan Peterson. I'm a real man.
They do the exact same thing as the Daily Wire and PragerU, just mostly in article format. Their tabloid-style articles are always some variant of, the barbarians are at the border. It's time to freak out. Queer people are groomers. Trump did nothing wrong. And given that last headline, it probably won't surprise you to find out that on top of the nearly $1 million from Charles Koch, $150,000 of the Daily Caller's funding came from the Trump campaign. And together, those two investments made up over 97% of the Daily Caller's revenue that year. In other words, Carlson's paper simply wouldn't exist without the Kochs and Trump money. And it's pretty obvious what kind of messages that money is buying and spreading. But even though Carlson is a celebrity, the Daily Caller really isn't. Even with $1 million in a single year, it's a relatively fringe media outlet catering to an audience already convinced of some pretty extreme far-right politics. You probably hadn't heard of it before this video, but what you definitely have heard of is The Atlantic. And the Kochs are...
Thank you so much, Duck Hash Browns. Have some more Frederick Miller's money indirectly. Oh, it's hilarious. Yes, I appreciate you transferring your business's money to Midwestern Marks, even though it's actually just your wage being transferred to Midwestern Marks. That's all right. We can pretend we're just stealing from the businesses. Thank you so much, Duck Hash Browns. What we need is a Stalin, actually. Like, we could use an Ingalls, but like Stalin was robbing banks to fund the Bolshevik Party. We need someone with that kind of balls. Just kidding. It's about impossible to rob a bank nowadays. So please, nobody try and rob a bank and say Eddie Lager told you to do it. But thank you so much, Duck Hash Browns. Rolling in super chats today. Appreciate it, y'all.
Are there too. We've now entered into the real big boy press world, by the way. This is a major, generally well-respected press outlet, and, well, some of their journalists have either gotten cash prizes for the Koch brothers' Reason Foundation, or are themselves heads of Koch-funded organizations like FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And what kinds of articles do these Koch-affiliated journalists write in The Atlantic? As you might expect, given everything else in this video, they talk about how free speech is under threat and you can't say anything anymore. While, getting paid quite a bit to say exactly that in a major magazine. And because this really is quite a tight-knit group, in the process of writing these articles, they happen to stumble into defending guys like Jordan Peterson, a guy who really can't say anything because of the darn woke mob.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Like with a lot of other conservative ventures in the free space.
And where were these people when Midwestern Marx was banned 7 times? These warriors for free speech who never ever seem to care when a Marxist gets censored or when a socialist gets censored. Because it's not a principled stance that they have in favor of free speech. It's a talking point that they're paid heavily to use. When in fact, when has he ever been censored? When has Jordan Peterson ever been censored? Jordan Peterson, left his college under his own free will. I had an email campaign go to my college demanding that I be fired, and they eventually let me go. Instead, it wasn't because of that, but Anthony Montero was fired from his college. I believe Norman Finkelstein was pushed out of his college for his activism on Palestine. The real censorship happens on the left with the socialists, with the Marxists. These guys are just using it as a talking point to stir up anger. How many of these motherfuckers, now I'm going to get angry again, how many of these damn dirty liars being funded by the Wilkes brothers or the Koch brothers have said a damn thing about Julian Assange? I'd be willing to bet maybe 0.001% of them, maybe Tucker Carlson. Right, a journalist who exposed that the U.S. was gunning down civilians with helicopters and rigging the elections against candidates like Bernie Sanders who wanted to give people health care, who's now being tortured and locked in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and he's set to be extradited to the United States where they'll lock him in prison for the rest of his life. Where are these free speech warriors? Where are these warriors of the First Amendment? I mean, Assange shows without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, these guys who haven't talked about Assange, that shows without a shadow of a doubt that they don't care about free speech. They don't care about the First Amendment. It's a talking point for them to help them get paid by billionaires.
Speech circles, this strategy funnels a mainstream audience, in this case that of a pretty legitimate magazine, to a climate change denier and well-known transphobe also getting his own cut of the Koch fund by painting him as a victim. Truly, no one could have seen this coming. And I chose to talk about The Atlantic here because it bridges the gap to the whole Daily Wire crowd quite nicely. But The Atlantic is far from the only press outlet the Kochs are putting money into. There are plenty of outlets and organizations getting the attention of the billionaire brothers. Another big one on the list, for example, is Time Inc., which the Kochs put $650 million into the purchase of in 2017. To give you an idea, Time Inc. used to own magazines like Time, of course, but also Fortune, People, Sports Illustrated, Essence, and the list keeps on going. Just to kind of recap, because I've been going pretty quickly here, right now, looking at only 2 families and in only 2 sectors of influence, online video and traditional media, we already have so much to go off of. A ton of money and huge audiences to match. The Kochs and the Wilkses have, thus far in the video, already spent hundreds of millions to either completely command or have a pretty direct impact on the editorial line of massive media organizations reaching millions of people in the US. These organizations then use their funds to spread homophobic, transphobic, and climate skeptic rhetoric, or will serve as a bridge to other figures receiving conservative funding like Jordan Peterson, who will make these statements more aggressively than better respected press can afford to. And by now, you might be wondering how this all happens.
I mean, more than that, even they'll make pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist statements, anti-communist statements too. I mean, the bigotry is definitely a part of it, but that's just a way they, get people on their side or distract people, keep people divided. Which, I mean, it's important to point out because that's their whole goal, is keeping people divided. But they also make videos like the one we just watched of Jordan Peterson bringing someone on to say that colonization isn't the reason Africa's poor, and then not pushing back at all. That leads people into these race science assumptions. Like, well, if Africa's not poor because of colonization, because of material factors, why are they poor? Maybe it's because of their race, which is what, the race scientists during colonialism we're pushing in order to justify it. But these guys obscure the truth so much about our system, right? About our system of capitalism, which at its core functions through exploitation of the working masses by the capitalist class, which leads to imperialism. And these guys obscure the truth of that in every single way. They tell you imperialism's not real. You know, colonization's not real. It's not the reason the global South is poor. As they push this like racist and divisive, bigoted rhetoric to keep people divided and fighting while obscuring the truth of the matter, obscuring the fact that they are the enemy, that Jordan Peterson and his donors are the real sources of our societal problems.
I've been using the Kochs or the Wilkses as shorthand, but it's probably pretty obvious that they're not out there doing all these deals themselves. So what's going on? This last column is kind of a grab bag. Throughout this video, you've heard me bring up a number of different organizations: Americans for Prosperity, the Reason Foundation, the Charles Koch Foundation and Institute, FIRE, and so on. All of these organizations' funding can be traced back to a couple sources. Another set of organizations with names like Stand Together, Donors Trust, TC4 Trust, or Americans for Prosperity. These are all pretty much interchangeable organizations that are most visibly funded by the Kochs, but usually also get donations from hundreds of other wealthy conservatives and so-called free market advocates. Take Stand Together as a quick example. It's one of the
Didn't realize I was muted. Dang it. Sorry, Chaya. There's a vid called "The Pro-Life Movement is Dangerous," where she talks about nearly all pro-life groups are funded by the exact same right-wing donors. Absolutely, right? Very similar thing that they filter all this money into, and that they use abortion as such a good way for the Republicans to mobilize people and get voters. So that's why they're dumping all this money into these pro-life groups. And then, you know, on the other side of that, you have the Democrat. Obviously, I'm pro-choice myself, but the Democrats dump all this money into pro-choice groups and pro-choice protests. And then they say the solution to the Roe v. Wade issue, the abortion issue, is to vote Democrat. Go to the polls and vote Democrat year after year after year. When the Democrats haven't pushed to codify Roe v. Wade into law. The Democrats have done jack shit to actually protect abortion rights. Other than tell you to keep voting for them every year and blame the voters for not voting for them enough. So it's just, they utilize a very important issue to push people into the voting booth to vote for two oligarchic, corrupt, imperialist parties.
These centers from which a lot of the influence money flows down to the smaller orgs that have come up throughout the last 15 minutes. On their website, Stand Together describes themselves as a, quote, philanthropic community, but that's a little vague. On their tax documents, they're a little more explicit. Stand Together's mission, in their own words, is to, quote, advance its members' common business interest by advancing the principles of free markets and a free society. You get the idea.
Sounds about right for a philanthropic community. We're just a community who gives charity that pushes our business interests and helps us exploit people and put other people in poverty and allows Bill Gates to buy up all the farmland in Africa and sell them a bunch of fertilizer that poisons their soil. It's charity. We're good guys. Look at how much philanthropic giving we've done. Now give us a tax write-off.
Yeah, philanthropy, business owners making more money. Potato, potato. And this goes for most of these organizations, which are almost all nonprofits that, quote, do virtually nothing but pass grants through to other politically active 501c4 organizations. So what else do they do when they move these funds around if it's not to either of the other two media categories? Well, for starters, they'll fund AstroTurf groups like Speech First, a student group.
Hold up. Wear a pilgrim with the dad joke. More like philanthropic, am I right?
Quote, defending free speech on college campuses, that happens to get funding and professional leadership money up the chain from Donors Trust. Or, still on college campuses, Koch-led funds will be directed at academic departments. To take just one example, because there are a lot of these, Koch-funded organizations will finance research centers like the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, giving their organizations oversight over faculty hiring decisions and even some student admissions, according to this article in the New York Times. What else? Of course, I couldn't make this video without acknowledging the dozens of think tanks propped up in all 50 states, which got a combined $83 million from Koch-funded orgs and their allies in 2011. Important names include the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and the Manhattan Institute. You'll remember the Heritage Foundation from every piece of climate change denial research ever, the Cato Institute for also denying climate change, and the Manhattan Institute for being the place where the critical race theory moral panic began. But the story doesn't end there. These think tanks, alongside a number of the other organizations in what has been called the Kochtopus, are deeply involved in yet another type of influence, lobbying, which they do at every level of the American government. Through the Americans for Prosperity group in particular, the Kochs and their fossil fuel allies have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on attack ads against Democratic candidates, most visibly against Obama in 2012. They have also poured a lot of money into the campaign funds of conservatives at the far right of the Republican Party, after failing to successfully prop up the Tea Party in order to push Republicans closer to the extreme. You might say they succeeded. And there is so much more, from the Mont Pelerin Society to the NRA to countless hundreds of other student groups, politicians, media organizations, nonprofits. There is truly no limit to how much time you can spend hopping from one organization to another, just following the rabbit hole of funding diagrams down to groups in your state, in your city, where you went to.
What would be really interesting now, I know this is the specific focus of this video is right-wing media, and this is pretty much everything he said here is covered in the book Dark Money by Jane Meyer that I've recommended a million times. But obviously the book goes way more in depth and focuses more on the Koch brothers. But it'd be interesting if he did one with liberal media, right? If you looked at the people funding MSNBC, CNN, and then any outlets online like the Young Turks, you know, that would be almost more interesting because we know the Koch brothers and the Wilkes brothers are funding the Daily Wire and these people like Jordan Peterson. Like, it's still a valuable video for sure, especially for people who aren't already Marxists, who aren't already privy to this stuff. But now it would be really interesting to see a follow-up video doing the same exact thing with Democrats and liberals.
College. I can't do this justice. I mean, I've given you.
Even with issues like the way that the Democrats dump money into pro-choice groups, right? I'm pro-choice myself, but I understand the way to protect abortion rights, isn't just voting for Democrats, right? The Democrats haven't really done anything to protect abortion rights. They're just saying, vote for us and we'll appoint a Supreme Court justice who's a little bit better once the next one dies, which is not a good enough reason to vote for a murderous imperialist party. But it'd be interesting to look at the way the Democrats weaponize those issues, even issues where, you know, you might agree with them, and use it to get people to the polls, get people to the voting booth.
The diagrams, I've given you examples, I've given you lists to try to fill this all out, but there's just so much more that I couldn't fit into this video. Anti-Muslim, anti-LGBT groups, just remembered. There. Between 2014 and 2018, Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund gave, quote, $13 million to organizations that profess anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, or anti-LGBTQ sentiments, including more than $2.7 million to nonprofits considered hate groups by SPLC. You're just going to have to trust me that what I've talked about represents maybe, and this is admittedly just a guess, 5% of what these two families are out there doing. And this is what I want to end the video on. There are a lot of people, and a lot of them billionaires, contributing to the various organizations I've mentioned who also have organizations of their own, who have companies that advertise in hundreds of media outlets, who have charitable donations going to university econ departments, and who have nonprofit AstroTurf groups staging protests near you. It's simply impossible for me or for anyone to catalog it, and even more difficult for the anti-capitalist left to match this kind of influence. This is only something that billionaires can do, and billionaires tend to like being billionaires. So
this is the book that you should read. Obviously, I have disagreements with Jane Meyer. She's a liberal, and I wish she would focus more too on, you know, liberal funding rather than just right-wing funding. But this article was turned into a whole book, which really details, like I said, what she calls the Kochtopus and all this charitable donations, all these charitable donations and philanthropy that the Koch brothers use to influence universities, influence media outlets, and promote their own economic interests. while getting a tax write-off for it and calling it charity. So here's a shorter article. And then this was obviously turned into a book. So I don't know what the article touches on in comparison to JT's video, but the book is honestly worth a read if you live in America, at least.
So yes, I know that Democrats have their own mega donors and their own NGOs and AstroTurf groups, but the left doesn't. Not with this kind of scale. There aren't billionaires willing to fund a network this powerful that would advocate for their abolition. And as a fun exercise to close out the video, let me give you an idea of what it would take to try and match what the right has without being a capitalist billionaire. What you're going to want to do is take your salary and set it all aside. Don't spend any money whatsoever. Do that for 10 years. Now find a way to multiply that by 100. Either wait 90.
Hey, you guys paying attention? This is what I need from you, Midwestern Marx audience.
More years, or maybe invest in stocks or something. I don't know. Multiply it by 100 somehow. If my math is right, you should now have roughly $56 million set aside. That's good. That's great. I'm really proud of you.
See, this should be easy. Then just give it to me.
You're 0.1% of the way there. One of the things right-wing media does really well is establishing life or death stakes. It's us versus the mainstream media, us versus the groomers, the migrants, the far-left communist Democrats, whatever the hot-button issue of the week is. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have 3 examples of right-wing coverage of the same story. Republicans introducing a bill that would make...
All right. Well, get to work, everyone. Start investing in stocks. Save up your entire salary. Quit eating. Quit paying rent. And then once you have $52 million, give it all to Midwestern Marx. And then we will be matching what the right wing gets. That actually makes me feel better, though, seeing how many or how much funding they actually get. And yet still our videos are as popular as they are, and our content is as popular as it is. And you have Marxist-Leninists like JT developing Marxist-Leninists with some liberal tendencies, but still with 1.58 million subscribers and getting 344,000 views and ratioing Jordan Peterson on Twitter and stuff. Because like I said, they have this money, but their goal is to lie. They have to obscure the truth about our system so people don't understand it and overthrow them. They have to lie, which is why it takes so much money and so much effort and propping up all these intellectual frauds like Jordan Peterson. We don't have to lie. We just have to get people to understand the truth. We just got to give people books that help them get to the truth of the matter. Help people have a materialist worldview that helps them see the world for what it is and see things, and see reality for what it is. We have to help people see through all the BS that's put out there by billionaires like this, but it's BS, right? Like I can deconstruct the Jordan Peterson video pretty easy, just with minimal reading about Africa and what colonization actually was. I guess I've done more than minimal reading about that. I've taken classes on it and stuff, but still, we have the truth. They don't have the truth. And, there's 148 people watching this stream right now. If all of you take the truth and you go tell your family members and you tell your friends and you recommend, Midwestern Marx or Second Thought or whatever, and more importantly, you have those conversations with them because they're going to trust you at first more than they trust me if you have a relationship with them, then the truth grows. Then they might go tell 2 people the truth. Then they might share, dialectical materialism with someone, and it can grow exponentially like that. And that's how communism grew so fast, or how it often grows so fast, and why the ruling class is so freaking terrified of it. And why they have to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on anti-communist media and lobbying and things like that. They know, as my buddy Che Guevara, who's on my wall right there next to my face, said, it's not my fault that reality is Marxist. Reality is Marxist. So we have to show people reality. They have to lie about reality. And that is our ultimate advantage. That is an infinite advantage that we will always have, and that's why we will win. And we will create a society where intellectuals like Jordan Peterson would be laughed out of the room, where normal proletarian people would hear him say that colonization isn't the reason Africa's poor, and they would go, ha 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 ha, you freaking idiot. You think you're an intellectual and you said something that stupid. That's the kind of society we're going to create. The amount of people's ears I've talked off about Midwestern Marx. I appreciate you, Sebastian. Sebastian's doing more for Midwestern Marx than I am out here. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 super chats from this man today. And he's sharing Midwestern Marx with his friends and family. Solidarity, Sebastian. You're the man. Today I taught a friend about Marxism-Leninism. That's awesome, man. I'm telling you guys, that's the best thing you can do. Talk to your coworkers, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your community, people you have relationships with. This is what they teach you when you're on a political campaign, whether it's a good political campaign or a bad one. Doesn't matter. What they'll tell you is that it's what does the campaign more good than anything is you talking to your friends and family, because they already trust you because you have that relationship built with them. Same with your coworkers, as long as you're not like a bad coworker or a douche or anything. But right, they already trust you. So if you start having these conversations with them, you can really change them and really help them develop politically, and help them see through a lot of this bull crap. So, recommend our content, sure, but more than that, educate yourself and then use that knowledge that you've gained to educate other people. And if we do that, it's only a matter of time. It's really only a matter of time. How do you deal with people that simply don't care? You have to find a way that politics affects them. You have to find what they care about, right? Almost everybody, unless you're super rich, cares about rent, right? Cares about paying rent, cares about their wages, right? People have to see their own interest in a movement, right? So it's good to talk about imperialism. It's good to talk about colonialism, but you always have to tie it back to how it's hurting people here at home. Right? We're sending millions and millions and millions or billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine and weapons while the trains here at home are derailing. That's billions of dollars that could be invested in our people, right? And, the stage of imperialism that we're in, or the stage of capitalism we're in, is imperialism. So everything that happens abroad, everything that our country does in terms of foreign policy affects the working class here at home. They're inextricably connected. Every dollar that's spent on a bomb is a dollar that can't be spent on education and people. So you gotta find what issues people care about, and then tie things back to that. Tie things back to their own interests, because nobody's going to be a part of a political movement that doesn't stand up for them. Unfortunately, people just aren't that moral. People are too busy working every day, getting exploited every day to, necessarily get a deep understanding of geopolitics and want a revolution to help other people. They have to see that revolution could help them and their family. I care about watching the world burn. Some people are like that. You got to focus on how much their lives can improve. Yeah, that's one thing we learned with the Bernie campaign. Like when we were arguing from a social democratic perspective, like you should want this because it would help a lot of people. Less people were interested. But when we argued from a socialist perspective, like if you're a working class person, you should do this to help you. More people got it. Humans are inherently a little selfish. It just is what it is. All right. We'll end the stream with this quote from Unparalleled Dev. Every gun that is made, every warship that is launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the clouds of war, it is humanity hanging on a cross of iron. The white Eisenhower, who warned us about the military-industrial complex before he left office. And after he left office, the military-industrial complex pretty much completely captured our government, and that's where we're at today, where they'll push us to the brink of nuclear war as long as it helps them fight Russia. Well, what got me into it was environmental impact. Yeah, that's definitely a thing, especially for young people who have to inherit the earth and who want to have kids but don't know if the earth is going to last long enough. But anyways, I got to head out, y'all. I got wrestling practice coming up here. Thank you so much for hanging out for the Power Hour. This was a fantastic show, I think. We had like 140 plus people in here the whole time, which is amazing. Got to deconstruct the biggest intellectual fraud in America, Jordan B. Peterson. Really appreciate y'all for being here. I'll clip these up and get them uploaded on YouTube ASAP. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. Yeah, that's all I got. Solidarity, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks to all the super chatters and moderators. That's what I was going to say. Where Pilgrim, Cobra Commander, Jacob, Unparalleled Dev. Thank you all. I appreciate you.